How is everybody today? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Let me take a moment and welcome our online community. As always, thank you for joining and watching what's going on, being a part of our church. Not just locally, we have people that watch all over different countries that tune in and watch what's going on. But if you're watching and you are local and you're checking us out today, wanting to see what we're all about, we appreciate that and want you to have a great experience as well. This morning, today, I want to talk about all of us, our favorite subject, and that is being offended. I'm just kidding. I do want to talk about being offended, but I don't think it's our favorite subject. But I want to talk about offense, and to even dial it in a little bit more, not just talk about offense, but how to handle it when it comes. What do we do when offense comes? So I want to begin in Luke chapter 17, and we're going to read these verses together here. And it says in verse 1, "Then he said to his disciples, 'It is impossible that no offenses should come, but woe to him through whom they do come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck, and he were thrown into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones. Take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in one day, and 7 times in a day returns to you saying, I repent, you shall forgive him.' And the apostles said to the Lord, 'Increase our faith.'" So Jesus is teaching on the subject of being offended. And here's what he said: it's going to happen. There's no way around it. No one is exempt from it. In fact, the Bible guarantees, Jesus guarantees us that offense is going to come. So some good advice today is this, is that when it comes, don't act surprised. When offense comes to your door, quit acting shocked and just realize, hey, we knew it was going to happen. We've been forewarned. Now, here's the real kicker, as I say, about offense. Good people will offend you. Family will offend you. Friends will offend you. So it's not just the bad people out in the world. Everybody has an opportunity to offend you. And Jesus said it's going to happen. Offense is going to come. And when it comes, here's what he says. You have to forgive. 100% just forgive. Now, I know that's easier said than done. Believe me, I get it. Forgiving sometimes can be a little bit of a chore. It's very emotional. Sometimes it goes very deep. It's very complicated. But we can't use those things as excuses to overlook it. Jesus said we need to forgive. So that should be our goal. That should be our aim. Someone once said that we are never more like God than when we are giving or forgiving. Because two of the main qualities or characteristics of God is that he is a forgiving God and that he is a giving God. For God so loved the world that he gave. And so those two attributes of God, giving and forgiving, are throughout the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. We always see those attributes in God. Now, in the New Testament, Jesus taught about forgiveness. We read it here in Luke's gospel. In Matthew's gospel, he talks about 70 times 7. Peter came to him and said, "Lord, how many times should I forgive a person?" And so Peter, trying to be very generous, said, "Hey, how about if I forgive somebody 7 times? And Jesus said, "Hey, how about 70 times 7? And I don't think that Jesus was so interested in Peter doing the math and coming up with the exact number of how many times that was. But he's trying to communicate to him this, that as often as forgiveness is needed, it needs to be offered. So the bottom line is that we always need to be ready and available to forgive. Now, we just read what I think is one of the funniest verses in the entire Bible. Jesus had just gone through this talk about being offended. Now, remember, his disciples had followed him throughout his ministry. And during that time of following him, he taught them. He taught them how to lay hands on the sick, how to pray for the sick. He taught them how to do miracles. He taught them how to pray. He taught them and challenged them to go out into all the world and preach the gospel. He gave all of these things that they were to do. But then he says in this one, but you are to forgive. And the disciples said, Lord, help our faith. Lord, increase our faith. We can lay hands on the sick. We can pray for the multitudes. We can do miracles. We can cast out devils. But this forgiveness thing, we're going to need some help here, God. So, Lord, increase our faith. We're going to need some help. I think it's interesting, and think about this for just a moment, because I really want to drive this home. We often ask God to use us. And I can tell you, there's no greater feeling than knowing that God is using you in a situation, or that God is using you in order to help impact or change somebody's life. And so we all love to be used of God. We all love those God moments when we get to be the giver into someone's life. And it may be praying for someone, going to the hospital, praying, laying hands on the sick. Every believer should pray for the sick, lay hands on the sick. Maybe it's just ministering to someone in their time of crisis. Maybe it's an opportunity to share your faith. Maybe it's an opportunity to be a witness or sing on stage or whatever it is. We all love the opportunities when God uses us, but I've noticed that none of us ever say, God, make me a role model of forgiveness. Let me show the world what it looks like to be wronged and then turn around and forgive someone. We don't want to do that because we know how painful it is and how difficult it is, but we are called to be role models of God's forgiveness. So we need to keep that in mind and say, God, help me to be godlike in that quality. But you have to come to a place in your life that you love the Word of God more than you love being right. You love the Word of God, you love the wisdom of God more than you love just proving to somebody, I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm the victim in this situation. You have to come to the place that you say, it really doesn't matter. I want to come to the place that God works forgiveness through my life. So the real measure of spirituality is not singing in the choir, not singing on stage. The real measure of spirituality is not being in the spotlight. The real measure of spirituality is not speaking in tongues. The real measure of spirituality is forgiveness and how to handle and how to effectively manage offense. So what does offense look like? And I would say it probably takes on a lot of different views. In fact, let me give you what I call a laundry list of what some of the things that offense looks like. If your feelings are hurt today, you've been offended. If you feel like somebody has ignored you, you've been offended. If you're feeling wronged today, you're offended. If there's unforgiveness in your life, you're offended. If you're holding a grudge, if you're prideful, if you're pouting, you're offended. So we kind of get a picture that it really involves our emotions and our wounds that cause us to be offended. But keep in mind this, that Satan's end game is not for you just to be offended. It's not just so you have your feelings hurt. Offense comes with the purpose. In fact, every offense is satanic in nature. In other words, there's a spiritual attack behind offense. And the purpose behind you being offended is not just to hurt your feelings, but the enemy will use that, Satan will use that to distract you and to derail you. Because here's the thing about offense, it can be deadly in your life. I talked last week about the word scandalon, and that's where we get our word scandal. But scandalon was describing a certain part of a trap. If a hunter goes out and lays a snare, that snare has to have a trigger, something that causes it to spring. That trigger to that trap is called the scandalon, which causes the offense. What happens when an animal is caught in a snare is that it is trapped. It's not going anywhere. I mean, for all reasonable purposes, its life is over. It's just hung out to dry, so to speak. And it's there waiting until the hunter comes along and captures it, or until some other animal comes along and devours it. It's just stuck there. And the Bible is trying to paint a picture. That's what happens when we get offended, is that we are basically hung out to dry. Because when you are offended, it stops your forward motion. It stops you from pursuing God. Offense will cut you off from God. Offense will hinder your prayers. Offense will stop your spiritual growth. It affects every aspect of your life. I used an example last week of kind of how offense works, or when you walk in unforgiveness. When you pull a flower up out of your flower bed, when you harvest a flower, it's going to look beautiful for a while. But you know after a little while, it's going to die. The moment you disconnect it from its source, the moment you pull it up out of the ground, it may look okay for a while, but you and I both know it's not going to last. And the reason I bring that up is there are a lot of people that have said, you know what, I've got grudges, I've got mad, I'm mad about an issue. I know people who have a master's degree in offense. And I've been offended for years. I know people that have held grudges for decades. And they're saying to themselves, I'm doing okay. But in reality, they're not. Spiritually, they're not advancing. Spiritually, they're not growing. So the thing about offense is that the enemy always disguises it as some attack or something in our lives. And so our whole goal is that we want to be quick to forgive when offense happens. So let me give you, there are 3 types of offense. And I want to identify these this morning. One is what I call imagined offense. And that is what I think people think or are thinking about me. It's what I think people are thinking about me. It's how I feel they feel about me, and they may even interpret how they look at me. I'm going to interpret that as something negative. So it's not that maybe they've even done anything, but I'm thinking I have that thought. Do you know what's wrong with each of these? It's that you don't know, but you think you know. In fact, the very definition of being deceived is to think you know when you don't know, but you think you know. And there are a lot of people that are deceived because they think they have it figured out. But what happens is this: imagined offense will cause you to turn a molehill into a mountain. Imagined offense will cause you to take something small that is seemingly insignificant, and through that offense, you're going to make it bigger and bigger and bigger until before long, your life is consumed with it. So again, there is a spiritual battle that is being fought for the control of your mind, because whoever controls your mind, your thoughts, is going to control the actions of your life. And when you're offended, you simply become a puppet on a string. So the next type of offense is accidental offense. In other words, I offended you, but I didn't mean to. I realized I offended you, but I didn't set out to do that. That wasn't my goal. That wasn't my intent. So what happens when that happens in your life, you have to remember what Ephesians 6:12 says, which says, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, and rulers of darkness. When somebody offends us, even if it's accidental, we're not going to turn them into our enemy. They're not our enemy. Remember, I said just a moment ago, good people will offend you. But keep in mind, there is something spiritual attached to it. The third type of offense is actual offense. That's when somebody on purpose says something or does something in order to offend you. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, finally I get to be upset. Okay, now I can be angry. Now I've got a reason, and now I've got a cause. Now I can begin focusing on revenge. But that's not what Jesus said. In Matthew 5:44, Jesus said this. He said, pray for those who willingly, on purpose, despitefully use you. So when I'm offended, I'm called to pray for the person that offended me. The quickest way to get over offense is to pray for the person who offended you. In Acts chapter 28, that's the last chapter of the book of Acts. And in that particular chapter, Paul has been shipwrecked and he ends up on this particular island. So they're trying to get dry, trying to stay warm. And so they build a fire, him and the other guys that he was shipwrecked with. And if you read the story, Paul grabs a piece of wood and he throws it on the fire. What he doesn't know is that there's a snake in that piece of wood. And so when the fire got really hot, the snake came out. Happened in just an instant. The snake came out when it felt the flames, and the Bible said that it bit Paul on the arm. Now, it's not just a snake, it's a viper, meaning that it's a poisonous snake. And the Bible said that when it bit Paul, that he shook it off into the fire. In other words, when he got snake bit, he didn't just go, well, would you look at that? Why do these things always happen to me? I have no idea what I'm going to do. I mean, maybe I'll join Snake Bite Club International and we'll sit around and talk about how we've all been snake bit. The Bible said that Paul shook it off into the fire. When you're offended, don't make it bigger. When you get offended, don't dwell on it. When you get offended, you got to do everything you can to shake it off, because when you harbor that offense, it hurts you more than the one that you're offended against. Years ago, when I was a student pastor at a church where I actually met Carol at, we had a guy that came and spoke to our church. He was an evangelist. You know, evangelists are always kind of showy. They always are, they're out there a little bit. They're kind of edgy. And this particular evangelist thought he had a really good idea. He was preaching on Acts chapter 28, the snake, and he was talking about shaking it off when you got bit. So he thought it would be a good idea to hide a plastic snake inside of his jacket. And when he got to that place of making the point, he was going to pull that snake out and shake it. And in his mind, I'm sure it was going to be a really great illustration. What he didn't know, however, is that Allison, who was our church secretary at the time, was terribly afraid of snakes. Now, how do I say this? That Allison was large and in charge, okay? And he stopped right in front of her and he pulled that snake out and he shook that snake in her face. And when he did, she freaked. And she grabbed the snake and grabbed his arm and she began to run back and forth, dragging the evangelist with her across the front of the church. You say, Pastor, what's your point? There is no point. It was just funny. I'm having a moment here. I thought I'd share it with you. You've got to shake it off. Offense is going to attach itself to you. Here's what happens when offense comes. Here's your options. When you get offended, one, you can nurse it. That means you can pamper, you can walk around all hurt, you can walk around trying to get attention from people, asking me about my offense, why I'm hurt, and what's going on in my life. You can make it, you can enjoy the drama. And there are a lot of people that do that. They're interested in the drama. So you can nurse it, you can rehearse it, and that's what I was talking about just a moment ago. You can put it on loop and play it over and over and over and over in your mind until it just becomes a part of you. You can disperse it, and that's when you begin to share it with others and want them to pick up your offense, because here's what I found out. Offended people run in packs. They're never alone. Offended people always go get them some team members to run with them. Offended people always go and gather people towards them. And offended people pull offended people together with them. Don't let somebody else pull you into their offense. Speak the word. You can nurse it, rehearse it, disperse it, or you can do what God says and you can reverse it. That means I'm going to forgive. I'm going to walk in love. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to take the high road. I'm going to talk to God about it. I'm going to pray for that person who offended me. The quickest way to get over offense is to pray for the person that offended you. Now, when you pray, don't pray, God, show them the error of their ways. God, just show them their sinful nature. God, just show them how many demons are in them. Lord, just show them how bad they are. That's not how you pray. In fact, sometimes a good way to pray, other than saying, God, I forgive them, I release them, is God, show me what's my part in this. Maybe I do have a role to play in this. Maybe I was misunderstood. Maybe something happened. But God, show me, how do I go forward from here? How do I fix this situation that I'm in? God, what is it you want me to do? Now, I've shortened my message today because I've got to do a couple of things here. One, I want to ask you, will you stand with me? And I really want anybody that is struggling with an offense or that has an offense in their life, I just believe today would be a good day to get past the offense in your life. Something someone said, something they did. Maybe it was something they didn't say or they were supposed to do, but you're offended. And sometimes we can't help the emotions that we feel. It just happens. But that's why we have to be in a place where we can choose and say, God, here's how I choose to respond to that. You got to come to a place to let it go. Now, I'm not being funny, but you know how they catch monkeys? I've watched a documentary on this. I'm telling you the truth. When they want to catch a monkey, and this is a documentary on the Bushmen of Africa. When they want to catch a monkey, what they will do is they'll cut a small hole in a tree, or maybe between a small pile of rocks, a crevice between some rocks, and they'll put in that hole or in that crevice a piece of fruit, something that they know that that monkey likes. And they'll put it inside of that tree or inside of that rock. So when the monkey comes up and he smells the fruit or he sees that in there, that hole is just large enough for him to slip his hand through. But when he grabs that piece of fruit in his hand and makes a fist to pull it out, he can't get his fist out. It was just small enough to slip his hand through, but a fist won't come out. And he so wants that he won't let go. And so these natives, these bushmen will come down and literally just throw a net over him and scoop him up and take him away. And when it comes to be offended, you can hold on. And you can be trapped. You can be held in that place. See, you can deal with offense with a closed fist. Or you can lift your hand to God and say, I deal with it with an open hand. I can deal with myself being offended with a closed fist, or I can deal with it with an open hand. To just say, you know what, God? More than I want that, I want you. And I know there are people here today that are offended. In fact, I may have offended you in this message. I get it. But if you're offended, this is an opportunity to let it go, to release it to God. I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Maybe you don't even have to think about it. You say, man, I know who offended me. I know the day, I know the hour, I know what they said. I still hear their voice in my head. I still see their actions played out in my mind. Maybe you know 100%. So you don't even need to think about it. But I'm going to ask you to bring that to God and to let it go. Some of you, maybe you've got to go back a few years. There's a moment in your life that you thought you let go, you thought you forgave, but you never really gave it to God. And maybe God is speaking to you about just clearing that out of your life, getting rid of every roadblock that stops us from going forward to a deeper walk with Christ. And if the Holy Spirit is speaking to you, if God is speaking to you, I want you to come to a place in this moment, because faith is now, and I want you to give it to God. So right where you're standing this morning, you can either hold on with a closed fist, or with an open hand, you can say, God, I release that to you. I'm ready to get beyond it. I'm ready to get past it. I'm ready to move on. My walk with you is more important than anything else in my life. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to worship God with this chorus. And as you're worshiping, and maybe as you lift your hands, you're going to just release that to God. Let's do that right now. Let's worship Him. And let's let God bring healing in our lives today.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us for the service today. I really hope that it was a blessing to you, because I know you guys are a blessing to us. If you'd like to follow us on YouTube, there's a link below that you can find that. Also, if you need prayer, you can text the number that's below and we'd be glad to pray for you and pray with you. If you want to consider about joining us financially and contributing to what we're doing here, you can also find that link below as well. Look forward to seeing you next week. We love you guys.